in the Torah is in Exodus 25 last week, 26. And I want to spend a little time on this because it's a very important subject. Is that ringing or is it all right? Coming through okay? I think sometimes when we read Scripture, I know I make it too difficult and then sometimes I make it too simple. There's always the danger of either one. But last week, Exodus 25 talked about make a place for me to dwell among the Israelites. And what I would like everybody to think with me is, why did God want to live among the Israelites? And why did it have to be a certain kind of construction? Why did He give the instructions that He did? When He gave those instructions in Exodus 25, it says, make a sanctuary. The word in Hebrew for sanctuary is mikdash. There's a word that's called the tent of meeting, and that's the ohel moed. And I'm leaving another one out. Tabernacle is the mishkan. They're all three speaking of the same thing, but they have different meanings. But the mishkan means a holy place. It will help you when you look at what God describes here if you think about your own home. If you are coming to your house and you see somebody sneaking in the back door that you don't know, or worse yet, breaking out a window and going in, what's your first thought? You don't want them there, do you? That's because to enter a home is to enter a holy place. There's only one way you enter a holy place. You go through the door with the permission of the owner of the home. That's real simple, right? It's real simple. Sometimes we get too complicated with God. Remember what Yeshua said about the fold and the sheep? He said, how did He say He entered the sheepfold? By the gate. He said all the others have come over the sides. And they're stealing, they're killing, they're dangerous. I want to bring this out because if there's any concept that I struggle with today because our culture's lost the concept, it's the concept of holiness. Holiness means that things are separate, that there's a delineation. When you lose the concept of the holy, you lose the concept of God. I mean, you even notice today how few of us are here. Part of our problem is we've forgotten that Sabbath is holy. It is every week. It never changes. It's part of God's very character. His creative nature is the seventh is holy. It's set apart. And when you lose this, you start losing sight of who God is, and you start making God to fit your image, what's convenient to you. So last week, if we would have talked about it, we'd noticed the first, God says, make a sanctuary. Then the first thing He said, well, don't forget, I can't forget this. He said, go to all of Israel and gather these materials, the blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, the gold, the silver, the bronze. He says, get all this stuff, and I only want that which is a free will offering. It's another thing to remember. You can't make a place for God to dwell that's coerced. You can't make a place in your life, in yourself, or in someone else that's forced. And so when Christians forced Jews to convert or be killed or banished, they didn't know their Bible. You can't force it. It's a free will offering. And the vast majority of Muslims were converted at the end of a sword. And what kind of a religion has it created? It has an angry, vengeful God who's watching to see you screw up and that's thrilled when you kill yourself for Him. I don't know about you, but I'm not that in love with this God. Trying not to be insensitive. But it's a free will offering. Then the first thing He talks about is the Ark of the Covenant. That's the last place you go. Why does it start there? Because your job and my job in following the Lord and following Yeshua is to make a place He can live. Remember what Yeshua said? He said, the foxes have holes and birds have nests, but what about the Son of Man? He has nowhere to lay His head. What was He talking about? He says, if you obey my words, the Father and I will come and do what? We'll come and dwell in you. You and I are creating within us individually and corporately a place that God wants to dwell. The first place to deal with is the most holy place. Yeshua also said this to the Pharisees. He says, you are so worried so much about how people perceive you, you're constantly cleaning the outside of the dish, but the inside is like rottenness and dead men's bones. He says, clean the inside, the outside will take care of itself. So, when God tells Moses to build the sanctuary, the first thing He talks about is the Ark of the Covenant. And this will come back. We'll get to this. Holiness also has numbers associated with it. The big number associated with holiness is 3. Everything keeps coming in 3s. You are 3. Anybody can sit here and know that you have got your body, which has a separate identity, I guess we could say. You have a soul, or who you are. And then you have a spirit. You have something that is godly. And if you don't believe me, how many of you have ever wanted to do something you knew you shouldn't? And you had a war. Something in you says, I really want to do the right thing. And something else says, no, I want to do... And there was a contest. It's because your soul and your spirit are not identical. The born-again experience is healing the brokenness of the human being. What is the word integrity? It comes from what word? Integer. What's an integer? It's 1. In Psalms, he says, you're great and you do wondrous things. You're God alone. Teach me your ways, O Lord. Unite my heart to fear your name. What did he mean? He means that human beings are double-minded. Ron shared about his sister. Do you think she wanted to slip back into her addiction? Not at all. But she did because something really wanted to. Don't tell me you haven't had that in your life. I know I have. We are 3. God is 3. You're a lot more than 3, and so is God. But in the courtyard, in the temple, there's an outer court, there's a holy place, and there's a most holy place. When you come to the courtyard, there's a boundary. One of the things we need to understand, and I've really been aware of this as I've been going to the sanctuary, is boundaries are important. Without boundaries, there's no holiness. When a man and a woman covenant to get married, you know what they do? They say, there's a boundary around me, and only into this most holy place, my spouse is the only one coming. Anyone else there is an interloper. Anyone else there is a criminal. Only one. There's a boundary. Be afraid in our society when we say there's no boundaries. The courtyard has a boundary, 100 cubits by 50 cubits. You come into that, you have to come through the east gate into a place where everything is bronze. Mostly. Actually, the hooks for the curtains are silver. But holiness involves boundaries. When we create a place for God to dwell, we have to have boundaries. When we step outside the boundaries, it creates this pathology, I would say, in us, in our personalities. Why do you think we have so many? Is anybody besides me struck at how many family murders we see? Just last week, a man went to his estranged wife and he killed her and all of his children. Would you say this man had integrity? Would you say that all of him was together? No, he's fractured. He's fallen apart. His boundaries are down. In Ezekiel 22, what does God say? He says, I looked for a man among them to do what? To stand in the gap of what? The wall, the hedge. Levitical Writings 179 says, wake up, slumbering shepherds. What? The hedges are down. When the hedges are down, where are the sheep? Out. And I'm starting all this because one of the things I've noticed in myself and in others, we live in a society that's removing the boundaries. And if we don't stand up and say, God's drawn a line there, and I agree with His boundary, we'll find ourselves out of the holy. Because the holy is separate. It's distinct. If you skip ahead to Exodus 26, and just the last 10 verses, I'm going to read this, because this, again, I think about it, and then I think, well, you know, you got to do more than think. Izzy is always posting on Facebook, and I don't know how many of you have ever met Izzy, but Izzy is classic ADHD. Oh, he's 10 ideas every minute, and he posts every one of them. You can imagine, Izzy reminds me a lot of my nephew Isaac and my grandson, Pretty. These are people that to just sit and listen to something is probably never going to work. These are people you almost have to give them something in their hands to work with. You know, Isaac had teachers that said he was dumb. Isaac is brilliant. Isaac graduated from West Point right at the top. But he had to learn how to learn. And my point is, to talk about holiness for a lot of us will never help us. We somehow need to be able to know how to encounter it, how to live it, how to embrace it. What does it look like? And Izzy was just talking about these learning styles, and he was just saying, for him to sit down and listen to a sermon is torture. He says in 5 minutes, he's doodling on a paper, he's twiddling his thumbs, he's spinning around in his chair, he's putting on a dunce cap, you know, something. How many of you have met people like this? You might comb their hair. Now, see, I'm different. I'm perfectly happy sitting and listening to something. You know, you take these left brain tests, John has fallen off the left edge of the earth. And it's because if you challenge me in my mind, I like processing it. But what I found is a lot of times I'll understand something, and I think I've understood it, but when do you really understand? When you do it. See, when I took piano when I was little and my mom taught me, do you know she didn't start out by teaching me music theory? Music theory is important. You're going to write music, but you know what she started off doing? John, that's middle C. And that blank page up there, that note right there is middle C. When you see that note, you hit this note. That seemed really hard because, you know, when you're a child and you've never played the piano and somebody goes like this and says, play that. What's your first thought? Impossible! How do you get to where you can do that? You learn, but mostly you do. And if now I look at that and I see E and my fingers going to the E without even thinking, knowledge that's applied becomes wisdom. And so in holiness, one of the challenges we have is to tell people how to be holy, but to not. What did Yeshua do with his disciples? He lived with them and patterned for them how to do it. And when they did it wrong, he said nice things like, oh, you perverse and unbelieving generation, must I always put up with you? He didn't say that very often. But so when I talk about this holiness thing, I would pray that there's some way that you can put it into real life. And I would say one of the things you can do is to, in the culture today, when you watch TV or you go on Facebook, get your antenna up to notice when messages are telling you to drop boundaries. To say it's all the same. You shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet material and fine twisted linen. It shall be made with cherubim, the work of a skillful workman. I would just point out to you that the curtain into the most holy place, the curtain into the holy place, and the gate into the courtyard were all made with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and fine twisted linen. They were all the same. The distinction for this one was what? The cherubim. That marked this as the royal chamber, the throne room. You shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold, their hooks also being of gold on 4 sockets of silver. You shall hang up the veil under the clasps, and shall bring in the ark of the testimony there within the veil. And the veil shall serve for you as a partition between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. How would you guess in Hebrew it tells us, put this block, here's this barrier. See, we have a barrier in this room, don't we? It's that curtain. And if you go through the curtain, you're on stage. If that were the most holy place, that curtain or that veil right there would be a separation between the holy and the holiest of holies. How do you think it says that in Hebrew? Between the holy and the what? And the holy holy. Now, what does this tell you about holiness? It's not all identical, is it? There are degrees of holiness. Now, this will trouble. I hear Christian messages on holiness, and they always will say something like, it has nothing to do with the external, and they're tired of people getting up and saying, we're going to give a message on holiness today, and then give a message on dyeing your hair, wearing lipstick, earrings, and that's what holiness lectures used to be. And some wise woman said, how come holiness is only about women? And so people are careful not to go there now. But on the other hand, I would point out that holiness, it is separation, so there are degrees of it. And just a homely little illustration here. It says that this curtain is between the holy and the holiest of holies, or the holy of holies. In your life, you have barriers. Just as in none of you have a home that doesn't have a door on it. And the only way that people are allowed to enter your home is through the door. Any entry into the home which comes through a wall, through a window, which breaches the defenses, the perimeter of the house, is unholy. God tells Moses to put in the Holy of Holies the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant is a trunk with the 10 Commandments in it, the jar of manna, and Aaron's rod, and then it has a gold seat on top with 2 cherubim that create a throne. So that it's a place of God's throne. And God's not even trying to be subtle here. The most holy place is the place where He sits enthroned. In Psalm 22, what does it say? Where is God enthroned? God's enthroned on the praises of Israel. Now, this is true for people, and it's true for God. Kaya shared a message that somebody had talked about, said, how big is your chair? How much room have you given God? You know, is the amount of thanksgiving and praise in my life giving God a place where He can't even sit down? You think about this, because when you look at we don't have a lot of time today, so I'll try to wrap this up. When you look at the courtyard, the holy place, and the most holy place, it will help you to look at yourself. In the world, you run into all kinds of people that are outside the courtyard. You just don't know who they are. They're people, and you don't wish them ill, but you just don't know them. Then there are people that come through the door into the holy place. You know them. They're acquaintances. You care about them. You know something about them. But they're not people that are a major, incredible, important part of your life. But for somebody to get into the holy place where they become your friend, the only way they can get there is when you grant them entrance. And by the way they've behaved, you trust them to come in there. Do you understand what I'm saying? How many times have you met somebody and something in you says, there's no way on earth that person's getting through the door? They're staying right out there. They're dangerous to me. They're scary. For someone to come into the most holy place, the place of the throne room, requires what I will call purification. You think, well, what does that mean? Well, let's think of some body. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. Is that true? What is the outer courtyard in you? It's your body. What's the wall? It's your skin. How do you get things into your body lawfully? Through your gates, your mouth, your eyes, your nose, your ears. When things come in other ways, what happens? Infection, disease, pathology. When you want to eat, have you ever thought that, what does God ask us to do? He says, I want you to become a part of me. In fact, he says, if you overcome, I'll let you become a pillar in the temple. What do I do if they serve steak for lunch? What do I do with that steak if I want that to become part of the tabernacle? I eat it, right? Now, how many of you know that if I took that steak and cut it in little pieces and put it in an IV and fed it into my vein, I'd be in big trouble? Now think with me here. Why? Why can't I want this meat to be converted to flesh and blood. Why can't I just feed it into my vein? It's not purified. It hasn't gone through a process. See, this is why, and I know I have made it too academic, but you don't go to the most holy place if you haven't washed in the laver. You don't go to the most holy place if you haven't gone to the altar of sacrifice. If you haven't done that, it's like trying to stick steak in your vein. It'll kill you. You've got to put steak in your mouth, mix it with salivary juices, chew it up till it becomes this nasty thing we call chyme. You swallow it, it goes into your stomach where it hits a pH of 1. What's a pH of 1? Really acid. It releases pepsinogen, turns it into pepsin, all this stuff that you don't care about, neither do I, but you're sure glad it happens. Because it digests, this meat goes into your small intestine, it's acted on by bile for the fat, you have other enzymes in your small intestine, comes from your pancreas, all this. It breaks the meat down until it has building blocks called amino acids. And then it has means of transport will take that out of your gut into your bloodstream. And when these amino acids go to the places where cells are building proteins, it can use them. They're purified. They're prepared. There are parts of the meat that go on out the other end. They're not holy enough. They're part of the process and they're good. You're always hearing people tell you eat fiber, right? How much fiber gets used to build your body? None. Is it important? Absolutely. You desperately need it. But it's not going to become part of your body. It's part of keeping your body healthy. This is all to say that part of holiness is being where you belong and functioning where God called you. The worst thing that could happen would be for fiber to think it was an amino acid. Because fiber in your bloodstream will kill you. It would go to your brain or your heart. You probably don't like to see stuff like this, but the little arteries that feed your heart, I mean, you all understand, don't you, that while your heart is pumping blood through your whole body, there's also little arteries on your heart that feed your heart muscle. These little arteries, what happens when a plug gets in them? You have a heart attack. Can you imagine how small of an item it takes to plug one of those little arteries? It doesn't take anything big at all. Or anybody that's ever had a kidney stone. A little grain of sand coming down your ureter feels like a Mack truck. All this to say, part of what we need to understand is that a huge degree of holiness is being who you are called to be in the place you're called to be. Remember what Korah said to Moses and Aaron? He says, what right do you have to set yourself up? The whole congregation is holy. Was he right? Of course he was right. But they weren't all priests and they weren't all Moses. And they had a place, and Moses and Aaron had a place, and an important part of these holiness distinctions, barriers, is saying, God, who am I called to be? And Lord, keep me in the path you have for me, that I will become purified so that I can be completely used by you. How many of you would guess that when you look at the process of meat going from this protein to an amino acid, that it goes through a lot? Pounding, chewing, buffeting, mixing, this, that, all the rest. And have you ever noticed, what does Hebrews say produces holiness? Discipline. And then he goes on to say, without holiness, what? No one will see the Lord. The book of Hebrews is all about what this Exodus passage is about. It's all about making a place for God to dwell and entering the place that's been prepared. I've started to see that if I really understood this, I would understand my complete need of Yeshua in a way I've never seen it. Because what is the way? What's the truth? What's the only gate? What's the only door to the Father? It's Yeshua. And Hebrews says that His body tore so that I could go into the most holy place. That veil with the cherubim is the body of the King, was torn for me. This just gives you some things to think about. There's a lot more to talk about, but we'll close now. I would just like to leave you with, please start asking God, Lord, what are your borders? What are your boundaries? Psalm 16 has this beautiful statement. He says, Lord, you are my portion and my cup. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. And understand that the desire to see God is put within inside of each one of us, and it's a wonderful thing. But you know what Yeshua said? He said, blessed are the pure in heart. For what? They will see God. Blessed are those who submit to His pruning, to His processes. And I don't know about you, but I'm guessing that being chewed up, mixed, thrown into a vat of acid. You know, I was thinking I could write a novel on the path of an amino acid from a hamburger till it becomes part of your muscle. And it's interesting that it's a picture of something being brought into us and put through a process to become part of us. And I always think we are a temple, but also Paul says that the body of the Messiah is a body, that it works together. And a lot of these analogies would fit our walk with the Lord. In conclusion, one of the things I think is very important in studying the Word is to ask God, show me your ways. Show me your thoughts. And, you know, I think when you begin to understand these things, it might be easier for you to understand why we don't eat pig, why we keep Sabbath. We don't do any of those things for us. We really do, but we do those because God said, here's the boundary lines. My desire is for you to be my people and for me to be your God. Walk in this way, and I'll be there with you. I